Welcome to Building People, Companies, and Careers, brought to you by AccruePartners. I'm Amy Pack.
And I'm Patty Comer. We're your host on this journey through the vibrant business landscape in the Queen City.
This podcast is an extension of our mission statement at AccruePartners, where we have spent over 20 years fostering connections and building relationships.
Whether you're a client, candidate, or business influencer in Charlotte, this podcast is for you.
We are immensely grateful for your support throughout our journey, and now through this podcast, we're excited to share the stories that have defined our path.
So let's dive in.
Let's do it. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Building People, Companies, and Careers, brought to you by AccruePartners. I'm Amy Pack, co-founder of AccruePartners, and joining me today is Ben Brandon, co-host and Executive Vice President of Client Success, and a prior guest on our podcast, the Boomerang Bounce Back.
Hey, everyone. It's great to be back on another episode in the host seat.
As with previous episodes, we bring to you internal employees, clients, and candidates, and any mover and shaker in the Charlotte business community. Our guest today is our very own Carolina Panthers play-by-play announcer, Anish Shroff.
Absolutely. What's even more remarkable is the relationship we have with our guest today. As a small business partner with the Carolina Panthers and leading talent solutions provider, AccruePartners played a pivotal part in connecting him with his role. It's a testament to the meaningful connections we strive to make across the Carolinas when building people, companies, and careers.
That's right. So without further ado, let's welcome Anish and the voice behind the Carolina Panthers and ESPN.
Glad I could be here.
So at the beginning of each episode, we like to start off with the classic interview question, tell me about yourself.
Yeah, that's a long story, but the Cliff Notes version is I was a sports-crazed fan who grew up in North Jersey. Parents were both immigrants, and I've always told people sports was sort of their way in. And when I started playing, it was our acculturation as a family to this country. And I was born here, and so for my parents, a lot of it was new, but it was their lifeline, and it was their tangent, I think, into the way of all things Americana. So that's where the love of sports started. And then, I took that to college where I was a broadcast journalism major at Syracuse, had a few stops along the way, Yakima, Washington. I was back in Syracuse working as a sports reporter, and then got my big break at ESPN. So I was at Bristol, Connecticut, our headquarters, for 4 years, mostly as a studio anchor. Did SportsCenter, College Football Live, all the studio shows out there, and then had some opportunities to do play-by-play, which I really loved. And it's what I had always wanted to do out of college, but television took me on a bit of a detour. So there was an opportunity with ESPN to do more live events and do more play-by-play. Part of that involved moving down to Charlotte. So in 2011, I started making the move down to Charlotte, started getting involved with college football, college basketball, college lacrosse, a little bit of college baseball on the remote side. And then at the time, I didn't know if Charlotte would be long-term home, short-term home. I think at that point in my career, it had just been way station to way station, and you're trying to figure out what's next. But very quickly, this place felt like home. And so when the Carolina Panthers job opened up a few years ago, being in my backyard, having watched their games the entire time that I'd been down here and, watching them even from afar, they're a fairly young franchise, and knowing a lot about them, having institutional knowledge, I just thought it would be a really good fit if it could work to have, this gig in my backyard, and things thankfully came together.
Yeah, and the likelihood of that happening in some people's careers is very minimal. So let me ask you this. What was it that brought you to Charlotte in 2011, since you were, working for ESPN, remote, traveling? What was it that was attractive to the area?
I'll be honest. At first, I was a little hesitant to move down. I had, spent my life in this career sort of as a vagabond, moving from one place to another, and then I was in Connecticut, which is not far from where I grew up, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to, move south. I didn't really have any friends or family in this part of the country. But when I made the move, it was for the opportunity to do more live events. and I still helped out on the studio side. ESPN has a satellite office out here. They had ESPNU. Now the SEC network is based out here. So I did some stuff with them. But the plan was to gradually move into a full-time live events role, which I did. And so after a few years, I got my wife to move down here. My dad has since moved down here. My brother's wife is from Charlotte.
Oh, wow.
And her in-laws live in Charlotte. So a few years ago, he moved down here. And so now Charlotte has become our home, and I've got my whole family down here too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we always say that usually when one person leaves the north, usually New York, New Jersey, or Ohio.
Yeah, I was that Pied Piper. Yeah.
You're the start of the underground.
That's right.
Yeah.
Great. So when looking back on your career, what was the most pivotal point in your career to get you where you are now?
Oh, there's been a lot. But I think I go back to just a conversation that I actually had in Charlotte with a guy by the name of John Vassallo, who still lives out here. He'd been a long time ESPN coordinating producer, and this is while I was still living in Connecticut. I had just come to Charlotte to help out with their coverage of National Signing Day many years ago, and John and I have this conversation in a hallway, and he's letting me know he runs a lot of the live events on the ESPNU side, and says, hey, have you ever done games? And I said, sure, I have. In fact, that's sort of what I wanted to do out of college. And he says, well, what have you done? I said, well, I've done baseball, and I've done football, and I've done basketball, and I've done lacrosse. And he says, oh, you've done lacrosse. I oversee our lacrosse coverage. So jokingly, I said, well, if somebody calls in sick and you need somebody, I'm happy to volunteer. And he says, well, if you're serious, he goes, I don't mind throwing you a game, see how you do. And I said, sure. So I had about a month to prepare for a Georgetown Notre Dame game. And in Washington, D.C., I think I knew everybody's grandmother by the time I showed up. And so we do the one game, and I reach out for some feedback, and he liked the potential, and he liked what he heard. And that one game led to couple more. It led to a season's worth of football, which led to basketball, and it led me to eventually moving down here. And he was a big part of convincing me to come down here for those opportunities. So that was, again, a small moment, but certainly pivotal, and I'm still feeling the reverbs of it now.
It's like Michael Jordan says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Right.
So if you hadn't have raised your hand to say, hey, this is what I would love to do, you might not have gotten that opportunity. So that's pretty cool. What have you enjoyed most about being in TV, in media, being the play-by-play announcer for the Panthers?
I just think you have an opportunity to have a front row seat to history every week. That's really neat. You have a chance to document. You have a chance to not only inform and educate, but entertain your audience, especially when you have a season like we did. It's our job to keep things lively and keep things fresh and keep things interesting. So, for me, there's a responsibility that goes with it, but we're not out here curing cancer. We're not out here trying to solve world hunger. We're out here giving people an escape.
Yeah.
And people come to sports because that's their 2 or 3 hours where they want to get away from everything else in their life, whether it's good, bad, indifferent. They might be going through a divorce. They might be having a tough time with their children. They might be between jobs, whatever it might be. People come to sports as an escape. So I've always had that in the back of my mind. Who's your audience? People are listening for different reasons, and it's on you to give them this diversion for a few hours a week. And obviously, from my standpoint, you have that great seat. You have that great window. You have a chance to tell the story of a team, tell the story of a season, story of the players, stories that manifest themselves within a game.
That's awesome. And I imagine some games that super exciting, a lot happening, it's fun, easy to fill the air. Other games where it's not the case, I mean, how challenging is it? Do you have some go-to methods that you're using? I mean, I guess there's some training that you might have had previously, but I imagine that has to be difficult. And I catch it when I'm watching sporting events, sometimes when it's a slower game.
I always say this, and I've told young broadcasters this: if your hardest 2 to 3 hours of the week are the 2 to 3 hours where you're calling the game. You haven't done the work.
Right.
So part of being prepared is being prepared for those situations. What if it is a blowout? What are we going to talk about? What if this game does go sideways? If both teams are throwing haymakers and it's back and forth and it's up tempo and it's high scoring, those are the easy games to call. Not every game is like that. So from my standpoint, you're just prepared. It's engaging Jake and Luke, engaging your sideline reporter, finding things with your eyes and ears, finding things that you've prepared for. I would say through the course of a normal broadcast, when you have what I would call an exciting game, you probably use 5 to 10% of the material that you've prepped.
Absolutely, yeah.
When you have a boring game or a blowout or a lopsided game, obviously that percentage increases, but that's where you're using your material. So, for me, it comes down to prep. If you're prepared, you never feel like you're struggling to get to the finish line.
Mm-hmm. What would be some advice that you would give others in their early careers wanting to take a path in sports broadcasting of some sort? What would be some advice you would give other young
the simple one, and this sounds so rudimentary, but it's read. We traffic in words. If you're an accountant, you have to be good at math. If you are somebody who wants to work at NASA, you have to know physics. If you want to work in a cancer research facility, you've got to know chemistry. We traffic in words. So for us, the currency that comes with words and how you deploy them, how you bend them, that's gold. And you become a better writer and you become a better communicator by reading. And so my message has always been read books. Don't just read about sports. Become as culturally literate as you can. Every piece of information, every descriptor that you pick up, that's another arrow in your quiver when you're painting a picture. So it sounds so basic, but I can usually weed out the folks by that simple question: do you like to read? And if they say no, I say, this isn't for you.
That's interesting.
That is great.
Well, since you mentioned reading, what are favorite sports book, favorite non-sports book, and how has it maybe influenced your career or path?
Yeah, I would say I probably read over a wide cross-section of topics. A lot of times it's stuff that I don't know about and I want to learn about. So part of what we do, there's, I think, an innate curiosity. We're always asking why. You see something, why? What's the story behind that? That's just part of being a journalist, being a reporter, being a broadcaster. So, the books that make you think, I think on a sports side, I would say Boys of Summer by Roger Kahn, where he talks about in the first half of the book, the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 1950s, a team that he grew up with, a team that he covered, a team that he and his dad bonded over. And then he finds those players in the autumn of their lives. And they all have their own stories, from Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella. All these guys, tragedy, triumph, different things, but sort of painting the dichotomy of when they're in their prime and they're ball players to when they become older and they show weakness and vulnerability. I thought that was a great book. Anything by Laura Hillenbrand, I'll read. The first one I read from her was Seabiscuit, which is as good of a nonfiction story that I've read on the page. It reads like fiction, but it's nonfiction. So I think from a sports standpoint, those two probably at the top of my list. And then non-sports, I'm big on the Walter Isaacson Genius series. He's done biographies on Ben Franklin, Einstein, Steve Jobs, Da Vinci. The Da Vinci one was probably my favorite, just how he gets into the process of art and science and melding it together. There's a great story in there about the Mona Lisa I think we can all learn from. That was a commission delivered by a silk merchant to paint a portrait of his wife. And this was somebody who at the time had been commissioned by dukes and popes and royalty. And, had painted these huge murals and sculptures. And this was a very simple commission, and he made it his life's work. And he put together something that is now the embodiment of art itself, right? And he used to go to the morgue and dig up cadavers to study facial structure and bone structure and how someone smiles. And so there was a science to Mona Lisa's smile, which I thought was fascinating.
Wow.
That is fascinating.
A story that I read about, the Ottoman Empire recently, Salim the Great and Genghis Khan. Ancient histories fascinated me. The Crusades have fascinated me. So I'll read a lot of that stuff in terms of just pure fiction. Lost Horizon, Shangri-La, that story I loved. Anything by, Dumas, Three Musketeers, the classics.
That's awesome.
It's tough to choose because it all kind of comes together. But I would probably say, I draw from there's a vast array of topics, and all the things that you kind of come across, I feel they help make you a better broadcaster.
That's awesome. Anybody that knows me knows that sports is an important part of my life, and not because I have teams that I just want to root for, but I also draw a lot of parallels to business and leadership from sports. Is there anybody that you've observed, whether it's on the Panthers or outside of the Panthers, that kind of embodied those leadership principles, like kind of on and off the field, and somebody that you maybe admired kind of along the way?
There's a number of guys, and I think obviously here in the Carolinas, we've been fortunate where you've had a Mike Krzyzewski and a Roy Williams and a Dean Smith over so many years. And to me, the great coaches are leaders. They're not
Absolutely.
X's and O's people.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
They hire great staffs. They know how to delegate, but they know how to lead. And it was one of the things that struck me in this last coaching search with the Panthers, right? I think from our fan base and from, a lot of people that you're wondering philosophically what matters, right? Well, this guy runs this offense and this guy runs this defense. And from an X's and O's standpoint, someone can do this and can do that. And soliciting the opinion of other coaches that I knew, whether they were in basketball or college football, said, what do you look for when you're hiring assistants? What do you look for when you're hiring a head coach? And they all said, the X's and O's stuff is important, but they've come across a lot of people who knew the X's and O's but couldn't lead. And so you can diagram a play on a napkin as well as anybody, but can you lead men? Can you lead women? Can you lead people? Can you be somebody that can get a message across? And you look at somebody like Nick Saban, the process. What I think struck me about Saban's genius was not just his ability to lead, but his ability to evolve, right? When you come into a situation, hey, you've got a bunch of guys who are fit for this scheme, but as a coach, I run a scheme that doesn't fit to their skill set. Well, are you going to adapt to them, or are you going to make them adapt to you?
Right.
And a lot of coaches will say, well, they've got to do what I do, and they do that, and now the team struggles, and you don't have the personnel, and now you're throwing the players under the bus, where the good coach says, okay, these are my ingredients.
Yep.
It's on me to make the best meal and figure out how to emphasize and amplify their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. And I think that's, again, with the Panthers, that's what we need. But I think that's just the crux of being a good leader, is to sort of assess the situation, see what you have, and sometimes you got to make chicken salad.
Yeah, right.
and you got to know how to make chicken salad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
That is good. Looking back at your last 2 years roughly with the Panthers, what's been the most memorable journey thus far with the team as you've transitioned, or you still work with ESPN, but with the Panthers full time? What's been most memorable during that?
One, just the people that I work with. I get a chance to sit in the booth most weekends with Jim Zoki, who's covered every Panther game since inception. Jake Delhomme, who took the Panthers to a Super Bowl. And when you look down below, you see a bunch of 17 Delhomme jerseys. Luke Kuechly's the single most brilliant football mind I've ever been around.
Isn't he?
And to pick his brain on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, I've learned so much. And some of the subtle things that he picks up, I've gone to other analysts and they go, wait, he looks for that? I said, yeah, he does. I'm going to use that. I mean, that's the type of mind he is. He picks up on these incredible subtleties. He'd be a great poker player.
Yeah.
Because he could pick up on tells right away. So that part of it has been great. I know we had a rough season last year, but The year before, I thought that was sports in a nutshell. We were 1-5. We had traded Christian McCaffrey. Everybody was ready to write this thing off. And the next thing you know, we go into week 17 at Tampa Bay with a lead in the fourth quarter. And had we hung on, we're looking at going into week 18 playing for not just a division title, but a first-round home playoff game. Unfortunately, we got the last great game of Tom Brady's career, and it didn't end the way we would have liked. But just that cartwheel that season took us on to go from, the dregs, and then all of a sudden you're getting to see the rise. That was special. And I'm hoping, 2024 and beyond, we have some playoff runs and we have some deep playoff runs, and hopefully the Panthers can bring a Super Bowl to Charlotte and the Carolinas, which I know people have been waiting for a long time.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
Well, like you said, kind of comes full circle. You were a part of history. Tom Brady had such a huge influence on the NFL. You were there to witness his.
I didn't want to see that, though. Yeah, right. I'll be clear. It was not something any of us wanted to see.
But part of history nonetheless, right?
I think what's interesting in the beginning of us talking, and you mentioned it was history, and then we asked you about your books, and it's history. So there's a common theme there, clearly. Yeah. And I don't know that I would have associated being an announcer as history, but it is history because people look back and, see what teams have done over the course of time and where they're going.
Yeah, the great Ernie Harwell said in his baseball poem, right? Everything is recorded and it becomes a statistic. Yeah. And that's kind of what it is. Yeah. I think something you see with younger folks these days, there is a lack of knowledge on events and things of importance before their time. And it's important to have context for the present, and you got to go back in the past. And if it happened before you were born, it's on you to know those things. And it's on you to have that context to fit the present in. So, no, I think history, and again, the Panthers have a young history. This is a team that's, not even 30 years old yet. We're about to play our 30th season. So we're a franchise where, again, we go back to 95. That was the first year, 93. The whole idea of the Carolina Panthers started. But when I'm covering other sports, especially college football, right? If it's Major League Baseball, you've got to know the past. You've got to know what happened before. You've got to know those names because there are fans who've been around who do know those things. And so that institutional knowledge, that respect for the past needs to be there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we end all podcast with rapid fire questions. Okay. I briefly touched on this, but you may have something you want to add to it. What was your first career memory? We talked about people who influenced you, but what's the first career memory that's really set in with you?
Wow, there's so many. But I think you got to go all the way back to the beginning, which was probably the first time that I stepped into WAER, which was my college radio station, and I did my first sportscast for them. And I remember when I got critiqued, and I did get ripped apart, like we all did. But the guy critiquing me said, "Hey, you've got some natural ability here. Stick with it." And it gave me the confidence. And that place allowed me in college to do things that most college students would not get to do. We were able to call home and away games for Syracuse football, basketball, and men's lacrosse. My senior year, I was able to do NCAA tournament games.
Wow.
And we got to the Sweet 16. And it was the year that we went into the tournament as the defending champions, having won it in 2003. So that was pretty neat. And getting, a front row seat to that as a college student. And you're courtside in Phoenix and Denver, and you look a few rows down, and there's Jim Nantz calling the game. It was wild. And so you talk about earliest memories. That plants the seed of, okay, I'm getting a taste of what this could be ultimately one day. And it makes you want it that much more.
Yeah, that's great because not every college student has those opportunities. Okay.
Who was your best and worst boss prior to current employers?
I think best and worst boss. The worst one is an easy one. So when I left my first job in TV in Yakima, Washington, I had taken this job at a sports documentary company in New York City, Press Pass TV. And after day one, I said, uh-oh, I'm working for two guys who do not know content, do not know storytelling. What did I get myself into? And so for the next couple of months, I was planning my exit. And it was just, I learned a lot about how you deal with people, how you don't deal with people. Just a lot of things that they did rubbed me the wrong way. And I remember when I told them I'm putting in my 2 weeks, they were upset, but they had already lost a couple of employees. It was a startup. And one of them very sarcastically said to me, oh, okay, yeah, you think you want to go big time? Like, all right, yeah, he wants to go do ESPN. Fine, get out of here. You've burned this bridge. Don't ever talk to us again. 8 months later, I was at ESPN.
So, did he call you or reach
no,
out?
No. I think that was sort of the end of it. I don't know what happened to them. I honestly hadn't thought about it until now. I've been fortunate to have some really, really incredible bosses over the years. I got to mention David Langton, who I work with at the Panthers, and the folks in our broadcast department, phenomenal. People at ESPN, John Vassallo, who I mentioned earlier, was an incredible mentor. He's become a great friend. Erica Galbraith, who I work with now on lacrosse, our college football team. People like Brian Yarrow and Ed Placey. There's so many on the studio side. I worked with so many great ones when I was in Bristol. I've been fortunate. We had some really good people, and we still do at ESPN. And I've got some great ones with the Panthers. So the list of great bosses is a long one. Thankfully, in my career, the list of bad bosses is a really short one.
Hey, well, that's good. You need it that way.
Right.
You need it that way. So when people think of you, what is the one saying that you're known for?
It's interesting you bring that up. So I'm not big on catchphrases. I think it's harder to be more original than going back to a crux. I'm not saying I'm above catchphrases. I would say for lacrosse, I will experiment with different goal calls, and for a shot that goes over the goalie and it scores, it's a high shot that beats the goalie above the shoulders. You often hear, high cheese or whatever, right? So I've turned that into penthouse parm. And people seem to have caught on to that a little bit. So that's one that's taken off. And, if there's a little hot sauce with that penthouse parm, we'll throw a little legalized marinara on top. So people tend to gravitate toward a few of those. But I try to mix it up. And if I find myself going to the well with, the same call, more than a few times, then I'll go back to the drawing board. It's time to come up with something new.
So you keep everybody on their toes.
You got to, yeah.
Okay, great.
And I guess the last question here, what's your favorite lunch or dinner spot here in Charlotte?
Yeah, same way. I like to mix it up. I'm not a guy who I don't go to the same spot twice, 3 times very often. We try to go to different places, my wife and I. But I will say this, when I lived in Uptown, when I first moved here, I lived right next to Basil Thai.
Yeah.
The place on 5th and Church. And when I would pull into my parking garage, you could smell the aroma. So that became my go-to spot when I lived in the city. So I would probably go there, every 10 days or so, because you'd pull into the park. It's going to cook.
Got to get something.
Well, let's go. Let's just go to Basil instead.
Yeah. All right. So I do have one last question. What sport did you play growing up? Obviously, sports is a big thing in your world, but what was it that you played when you were a
Yeah, so baseball was the big one.
Okay.
Baseball, basketball, tennis. I played tennis in high school, but baseball was the sport that made me fall in love with sports. And it was the sport that taught me the most lessons, because when I started, I was really bad. And I've told this story on Little League broadcasts before. It was, hey, put him in right field, cross your fingers, the balls, and hit to him. When he's up, have him bunt, because that's the only chance he has. And one off season, I remember getting really upset after the last game. I struck out to end the game, and I was 7 or 8 years old. I got tears running down my face. My mom goes, "What are you crying about?" And I said, "Well, I struck out." She goes, "You didn't even swing the bat." I said, "Well, I was going to miss it anyway." She goes, "Do you really want to do this?" And I go, "No, I don't want to quit." She goes, "Well, why don't you put some work into it? We'll try to help you." And again, my parents were immigrants. They didn't know what to do. So my dad in the front yard would take a tennis racket and pop the ball up a mile into the sky. And, okay, go catch it. We lost a lot of tennis balls in the sewer, a lot. And then one day I caught one, and then I caught another, and then I was catching all of them. And then he would take me to the batting cages a couple times a week. And I went from missing everything to fouling off a few pitches, to fouling off some more, to then making hard contact. And I will never forget the first game the next year. They throw me out in right field, and there's a line drive hit to me, and I catch it, and I double the kid off of first, and then I hit a double in my first at-bat. And by the next season, I made the All-Star team.
That's awesome.
And so for me, it was this validation of you're bad at something, but you worked at it, and you see the results of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was the single greatest life lesson that I've learned. And it came from sports.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a great wrap up of today's podcast. So we really appreciate your time. And I certainly learned a few things about history. So we appreciate that. And we're thrilled to have you here in the Carolinas and part of the Panthers team. And hopefully we'll see a great season as we enter into 2024 football.
I hope so.